service is being recorded, both for YouTube and on your friendly neighborhood website. Joys and concerns or similar personal moments will be edited out. If you have privacy concerns, you can turn off your camera so you're not seen and rename yourself. Sacred space is difficult to find your way to from cyberspace, but I think together we can do it. Now we have nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. Shut off all that might distract you and be present. This is our threshold moment as we enter sacred space together. Our service begins now. As the chalice is lit, you may choose to light your own chalice or candle or hold your hands in the shape of a chalice. But either way, join our choir as we sing.
We light this chalice to remember, to light the fire within our own hearts.
And now for our prelude, Cry No More by one of my favorite contemporary artists, Rhiannon Giddens. Susanne, would you like to say something more about it?
Yes, actually, I'd like to share a quote from Rhiannon Giddens about the creation of this song. Just pull it up. In her words, "The massacre at the AME Church in Charleston is just the latest in a string of racially charged events that have broken my heart. There are a lot of things to fix in this country, but history says if we don't address this canker, centuries in the making, these things will continue to happen. No matter what level privilege you have, when the system is broken, everybody loses. We all have to speak up when injustice happens, no matter what. Grief like a drum, strength like a choir, and hope like a single voice rising are the only vocabulary needed, and language anyone can understand."
First they stole our bodies,
I can't cry no more.
then they stole our sons,
I can't cry no more.
then they stole our God,
I can't cry no more.
and gave us new ones.
I can't cry no more.
Then they stole our beauty,
I can't cry no more.
the comfort in our skin,
I can't cry no more.
and then they gave us duty,
I can't cry no more.
and then they gave us sin.
I can't cry no more.
And then came generations
more.
that helped to build this land.
I can't cry no more.
The bedrock of the nation was laid with these brown hands.
I can't cry no more.
The solace of a people was found with that new God.
I can't cry no more.
And many peaceful steeples
I can't cry no more.
would guard the road we trod.
I can't cry no more.
And then they stole our solace.
I can't cry no more.
And then they stole our peace.
I can't cry no more.
With countless acts of malice
cry no more.
and hatred without cease.
I can't cry no more.
A foul and dirty river runs through this sacred land.
I can't cry no more.
With every act of terror,
I can't cry no more.
they tell us where we stand.
I can't cry no more.
500 years of poison,
I can't cry no more.
500 years of grief,
I can't cry no more.
500 years of reason.
I can't cry no more.
To weep with disbelief.
I can't cry no more.
The legacy is my
Good morning, and welcome to those who have just joined us. Today, almost all of us are in isolation in our own homes, homes that are on the traditional lands and territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Haudenosaunee nations. I offer my gratitude to our First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. I will work to honor those teachings, remembering what Tom King wrote in The Inconvenient Indian. The fact of Native existence is that we live modern lives informed by traditional values and contemporary realities, and that we wish to live those lives on our own terms. If you are visiting us for the first time, we welcome you. Please stay around after service. If you don't go to a breakout room, staff will be in the main room to answer any questions we might have about who we are and what we do. Our mission at Neighborhood is to empower spiritual growth and shared action for the care of the world. Today's service will focus on the shared action component of that duality. Our theme for today is Black Lives Matter. So here am I, an aging white man living, as Murray says, on a white cloud. And my first thought is, it's not my place to say anything about Black lives. But implicit in that is my own backstory of white fragility, and I can say something about that. I grew up being taught that racists were bad people, and that as me and my family were good people, we weren't racist. It was a simple binary. And like a lot of simple binaries I learned about, gender comes to mind, it wasn't true. At university, I think was the first time I was confronted with people I liked, who seemed to be good people, whom I learned were racist. As I got some more perspective, I learned to recognize how the, quote, funny jokes I told in childhood were really racist. Polack jokes, Newfie jokes, French-Canadian jokes, which were very popular in English schools in Montreal about a half century ago. I would probably have been furious had anyone said to me that those were racist, and probably said, hey, it's just a joke. We've probably all heard that line before, and we've all learned how erroneously defensive it is. Today, I would say we all have to learn to deal with our own racism in the same way we all have to learn to deal with our own anger. Like gender, racism is a spectrum that we're all on somewhere. But the best thing about growing older is that if I pay attention, I see more of how the world really is. And perhaps then, with a little help from my friends, I can change and get a bit better in dealing with my own racism. In the words of Arundhati Roy, the trouble is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There is no innocence. Either way, you're accountable. Traditionally, at this time in the service, we ask you to turn to your neighbor and greet them. Now, briefly unmute your device, switch to a gallery view, and offer a greeting to those around you. We'll sound a chime to end, but now greet your neighbors.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Anna.
Morning.
Hi,
Sean. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Donavan.
Hey,
Carol.
Michelle.
Deb.
Great.
Hi,
Hi, Lauren. Hi,
Veronica.
Dave.
Hi,
Dina.
Hi,
Hi, Helen. Hi,
Nice to
Jesse.
meet
Nancy.
you.
Hi, Anna.
Hey, Doug.
Susan, Natalie. Hi.
Veronica.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Kurt.
George.
Oh,
Tina.
Luann. I hope that
Hey, Luann. Recovering Sigrid.
Hey, Nancy.
Oh, there's Luann. Yeah.
Yay!
Aw. Bye.
Now, I invite you to join me in reading our opening words, which will appear on your screen. If you're on a phone, I don't know the words, just listen to my reading. Let us cast a circle of a sacred space here. Let us cast the circle of a cherished space here, a space of safety, a place of forgiveness, a place of love. If we want the world to change, we must craft in our space and in ourselves the seeds that grow a different kind of life, a life of graciousness, of creative intelligence, a place of life and spirit for ourselves and our families. Now, as we hold this place open to both grace and insight, please join Susanne for our opening song. Susanne?
Thanks, Peter. I invite everyone to go to gallery view, as I am doing now, so we're able to see each other on the screen when we sing this one. We're going to sing Mark Miller's prayer chant, We Resist. We've done this song a number of times with this congregation, but if it's unfamiliar to you, it's repeated a lot. I'm sure you'll pick it up. And I just wanted to point out this song was also written, like our prelude this morning, after the shooting in Charleston at the AME Church. So please join members of our combined faith organizations, the DMC, in singing Mark Miller's prayer chant. We resist, we refuse to let hatred in. We rise up, we won't back down. We're in this till the end. We resist, we refuse to let hatred in. We rise up, we won't back down. We're in this till the end. We resist, we refuse to let hatred in. We rise up, we won't back down. We're in this till the end. We resist, we refuse to let hatred in. We rise up, we won't back down. We're in this till the end. We resist. Pray for your enemies. Welcome the stranger. Show love to God. We're in this till the end. We resist. Pray for your enemies. Welcome the stranger. Show love to God. We're in this till the end. We resist. Pray for your enemies. Welcome the stranger. Show love to God. We're in this till the end. Pray for your enemies. Welcome the stranger. Welcome the stranger. Show love to your neighbor. We're in this till the end. Pray for your enemies. Welcome the stranger. Welcome the stranger. Show love to your neighbor. We're in this till the end. We're in this till the end.
Thank you for that, both to the singers and to the art makers. That was wonderful. Now, all the young and young at heart, please come and get close to the screen because Zack has something to share with you. Zack?
Good morning, everyone. A special welcome to Donavan Hayden today. I'm glad you could join us. Our topic this morning is Black Lives Matter, and it's a super important topic because Black lives do matter, and they have to in our society if we're going to make any further progress as people. So what do we do now, a year after the movement caught huge focus and attention? For me, as a white person, it means listening and believing when I'm told by Black people about unfair treatment. It means using my voice to speak out against injustice and to amplify BIPOC voices. And it means learning about and celebrating the history, culture, and excellence of Black people. Today I found a video for you to amplify and celebrate Black people from a wonderful children's TV program made by BIPOC creators and rooted in research, racial equity, and radical joy, called Look, Listen, and Learn. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Hey, hi, Possum.
Oh, hello, Auntie Lena.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Well, I just got back from riding my bike outside. It's so sunny.
Oh, that's why you sound like you're out of breath. The
Mhm.
weather is beautiful today.
Oh, it is. I can't wait for summer. But Auntie Lena,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
can I ask you a question?
Of course you can, Possum. What is it?
Well, I haven't seen any protests near my tree lately, and do Black lives still matter?
Yes, Black lives still matter, and they always will.
So, does that mean that Black people are being treated fairly now?
No, Black people are not being treated fairly. Do you know what racism means, Possum?
Not really.
Well, to me, racism is the unfair treatment of people based on the belief that one race is better than the other. Even though we have had a lot of protests last year, Black people are still experiencing racism.
But then why did the protests stop?
They didn't all stop, Possum, but more and more people are starting to protest racism in other ways.
Oh, there are other ways to protest?
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what protest means?
Oh, I think so. It means to stand up and make a change.
That's right. Marching in the streets is one way to do that, but standing up against racism and unfair treatment is something else that we have to do every single day.
Every day?
Yes. Think of it this way. Do you know all of the ingredients in Mama Possum's bugberry pie?
Oh, yeah. It has bugs and berries.
And it also has butter, salt, and flour that holds everything together in the crust of the pie.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about those things.
Yeah, well, your pie won't have a fair chance to taste good without them, right?
Oh, it sure wouldn't.
You need those ingredients just as much as you need the bugs and the berries.
So all of the ingredients have to work together?
Exactly. We need everyone working together every day to stand up against racism.
Oh, but that seems hard.
It can be. But like I said before, Black people are being treated unfairly every day. So every day we have to work hard and protest racism until Black lives matter.
Oh, and how can we protest every day, Auntie Lena?
Well, there are 3 ways that come to mind. Number 1, listen.
Listen? Well, that's it?
Yes, it's that easy. Listen to Black people, and when they say something needs to be fixed, learn how you can help.
Oh, well, I can do that. What's number 2?
Number 2 is use your voice. Talk to your friends and families about what needs to be fixed. And if you see a Black person being treated unfairly, say something. Use your voice.
Use my voice. Oh, well, I can do that too, Auntie Lena.
And number 3 is celebrate.
I love to celebrate.
Me too, Possum. And it's one of the most powerful ways to protest, by celebrating Black people, our history, our culture, our accomplishments. And it shows the world that we deserve love, joy, and respect, just like everybody else.
Wow. Oh, I'll celebrate by telling everyone at school that Black lives still matter.
That's a great start, Possum.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for talking to me today, Auntie Lena.
You're welcome. And remember, you can always ask me anything.
Oh, I will.
And you know what else I want you to remember? You are the best you that the world will ever see.
Oh, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This is a special time in our service when we invite you to share a joy or a concern in your life. Open your reactions tab at the bottom of the main window and raise a virtual hand if you have a joy or a concern. If you're here on the phone without a screen, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. To speak, you have to unmute your device, and to be seen, you need to have your camera on. Once you've spoken, please remute your device. Please respect the sacredness of the ritual, and as much as you can, refrain from making announcements and telling stories. This is a cherished time in our community that can bring us closer in these times that separate us. We start by expressing gratitude for all the volunteer efforts, seen and unseen, that help our community to hold together. I offer a candle of concern for those members of our congregation whom we've stopped seeing since the pandemic began. We miss them deeply and hope that as times change, we'll be able to have them back here with us. I light a candle of gratitude for those working to help us understand the 8th principle, and whose political understanding helps us to dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. And our final candle is for all those joys and concerns that remain unspoken in our hearts. And now I ask Natalie to lead us in meditation. Natalie?
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to lead you in a loving kindness, or also known as metta meditation, that comes from the Buddhist tradition. I learned this particular one from Joanna Macy, who's a California-based eco-philosopher and Buddhist scholar and root teacher of the work that reconnects, which I study and facilitate. And she in turn learned it from Sister Karma Kechog Palmo, a nun in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. She adapted it for use in the West, and I have in shortened and adapted her version for today. And this, I did a different form of this kind of metta meditation regularly for a while, and I can really recommend it as a practice. So I will offer a series of invitations. If you don't like them, feel free to change them. And you can also just use this time in any way that suits you. So I invite you with that to just find your connection with ground, with what you're sitting on. You can close or lower your eyes if that feels comfortable. I invite you to take a deep breath and exhale just to release any tension. And you can let your attention rest on your natural breath, on its normal flow, inhaling and out, exhaling. And I invite you now to call to mind someone you love very dearly. you can just notice the very first person that comes to mind. And I invite you to imagine that beloved one before you. You can silently speak their name. And I invite you to feel your love for this being like a current of energy coming through you. You can connect with how much you want this person to be freed from fear, from confusion, from sorrow, and all the causes of suffering. That desire in all its sincerity and strength is loving kindness or metta. You can continue to feel that warm flow coming through the heart. And now I invite you to imagine in a circle around you those with whom you share your daily life, maybe people whom you work with or live with, your neighbors, closest friends and family members. And I invite you to behold one at a time and to direct to each in turn that same current of loving kindness, undiluted. You can just connect with how much you want them to be happy and well. And now in wider concentric circles, I invite you to imagine around you your relatives, acquaintances, perhaps members of this congregation. And I invite you to let that same beam of loving kindness play on them as well, pausing on one at a time. With them as well, you can notice how much you want their freedom from greed, from fear, hatred, confusion, how much you want them to be well. Among these beings, whether in your inner or your outer circle, there may be some with whom you're uncomfortable or in conflict. And with those especially, I invite you to connect with your desire that they be free from fear, from hatred, from greed, ignorance, and all the causes of suffering. You might bring before you in your imagination just one or two of those people and really direct that loving kindness toward them. And beyond them, in concentric circles that are wider still, you can hold in your awareness all beings with whom you share this planet time. Though you have not met them, your lives are interconnected in ways you do not fully know. And so to these beings as well, you can direct that powerful current of loving kindness. You can notice your desire and your intention that each awaken from fear and hatred, from greed and confusion, that all beings be released from suffering. And now you can turn your attention back toward the being you know best of all, the person that you've been given to be in this lifetime. You know this person's need for love, the commitments this being worked so hard to carry out. You can speak the name that you are called in love. And I invite you to connect with how deeply you desire that this being be free from fear, released from greed and hatred, liberated from ignorance and confusion and all the causes of suffering. You can direct that same beam of loving kindness now back toward yourself. And in your own time, I invite you to slowly bring open your eyes and bring your attention back to our Zoom call in the community. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a joy and a privilege to introduce Donavan Hayden, a Black activist, storyteller, and artist. He recently finished his MA in Theater and Performance Studies at York University. He's engaged with Unitarians doing anti-racism work in both Canada and the US. He blends activism and art towards the goal of Black liberation and the dismantling of white supremacy. I've known Donavan as long as I've known Neighborhood, and he truly is someone who gives me hope for the future. Donavan, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, it's so wonderful to be here. I think last time I spoke here was, I don't know, it's in 2018 maybe, and thinking how much I've changed, but also how much the world has changed. We marched, we chanted, we declared to a nation unwilling to listen, no justice, no peace, Black lives matter. The spirit of social justice propelled us forward through our streets. Suddenly, a line of police, SWAT, and vans blocked our path. They told us if we continued marching, we would be arrested. The organizers calmly asked to speak to their chief of police or a supervisor to give their list of demands. The police said no and continued to threaten us with arrest. The organizers asked again. They were told no again. After which, the organizers continued to peacefully march forward past the police line. At that point, the police tackled, tased, punched, arrested, and dragged them away. To where? The police wouldn't say. The charges? The police wouldn't say. The scene I described was common in the summer of 2020. Scenes of police violence against peaceful protesters in the United States filled our screens. However, this did not happen in the US. This protest was in the GTA. It was not a protest for George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, although we honor their lives. It was a protest for the killings of Aziz Chowdhury, Jamal Franceek, and DeAndre Campbell, and many more community members harmed by our police. This protest was not last summer. This protest happened this year. I myself was arrested this year at a memorial for Regis Kwashinsky Paquette, a Black and Indigenous woman who died during a police intervention in Toronto. Regis, Aziz, Jamal, and DeAndre have not received justice. Instead, the police continue to attack and brutalize and re-traumatize our communities with violence and arrests. The summer of 2020 was a moment of racial reckoning. As important as that moment was to me and Canadian society, it was only that, a moment. Police continue to have overwhelming power in the city, and John Tory's municipal government continues to undercut the safety of marginalized and racialized communities. The clearing of encampments in the summer are the starkest example of the police power and the city's prioritization of profit over people. But that is only one highly visible way that the city excludes and punishes poor and racialized people. The work is not done. It is now our responsibility to turn last year's moment into this century's movement, to be in it till the end. So how can we continue in a struggle and sustain ourselves in this very difficult work? By engaging in anti-racism work as our spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is a term familiar to UUs. As Unitarians, we have access to books and online resources to help us develop and maintain spiritual practice. One of the advantages of being the son of a minister are shared sermons. My mother, who you may have heard of, Reverend Pat Trudeau, gave a sermon on spiritual practice last year that addressed the question, how can anti-racism work be an effective spiritual practice? The key elements of spiritual practice she lays out are that they be done with intention and attention. It is important that anti-Black racism work be intentionally specific. In white dialogues on race, the focus on anti-Black racism in Canada is often lost in a broader discussion on diversity, or it is diverted to talking about the United States. Avoid the urge to divert dialogue to a more comfortable conversation that decenters Black people and avoids accountability. I've watched many UUs fumble with this. In a discussion about anti-Black racism in Canada, be intentional in staying on that topic. Unitarians espouse progressive values and principles. I am seeing great strides in UUs being intentional and addressing anti-Black racism in discussions. If there is one thing that UUs are good at, it is certainly talking. However, what is often missing is reliable action that supports Black people. Part of the intention of spiritual practice is that it can be done regularly and be maintained. As the possum asked in that video earlier, as much as protests are admired, it is the smaller, everyday, repeatable actions that keep us engaged in the struggle. Activist groups have realized this and have restructured their approach to include multiple forms of resistance. They are focusing on changing policy through contacting officials and supporting progressive politics, educating the public through teach-ins and amplifying the lived experiences of marginalized people, protecting our most vulnerable people through mutual aid, emergency funds, and smaller targeted demonstrations. UUs can learn from these groups. We can strive for an anti-racism spiritual practice that is repeatable and can lead to tangible change. If UUs are intentional about addressing anti-Black racism, committing ourselves to oppose it, develop consistent practices, and holding ourselves accountable to maintain them, we as a faith will be able to adapt and be welcome in the movement for racial justice. Intentional spiritual practice can get UUs in the space physically and mentally to address racism, but attention makes the practice transformative. Last summer forced white Canadians to pay attention to anti-Black racism. White Canadians are now committing themselves to movements like Black Lives Matter. That is good, but make sure that y'all are coming correct. White people start being allies when they recognize that they are the visitors in the movement. Black and Indigenous people, specifically Black and Indigenous queer folk and women, were doing this work long before summer of 2020 and will continue to be the vanguard after everyone else goes home. Reverend Aisha Ansano writes, "White people tend to be visitors to the struggle for racial justice, ones that aren't forced to be there but can choose to come in and leave whenever they like. People of color reside in the struggle for racial justice by virtue of their race," end quote. White liberals often talk the talk and then talk too much. They give the disclaimer before they speak that they are white and privileged. Their talk appears to show recognition of their visitor status, but their actions show a lack of true intention. I have been in many conversations where white people commandeered the space to provide some off-topic and self-aggrandizing narrative about how not racist they are. My message is, be mindful of what you are saying and how long you are saying it. As a visitor, it is crucial to listen to the authority of racialized people. Reverend Ansano continues, "As people who are constantly in the struggle, people of color have the right to make claims on what they find okay and not okay, what they see as helpful and not helpful," end quote. In other words, it is not white people's place to say how we should protest. A compassionate visitor takes accountability for the mistakes and harm they have caused. It is easy to reject external racism, but what about when you are the one being challenged or called in by a racialized person? Will you dismiss it as a misunderstanding? Will you get upset at them for bringing it up? Or will you listen and accept the feedback so that you can continue to learn and grow? If you truly wish to be allies, you will take our word for it. Trust us. I continue to do this work myself as a visitor in other movements. Since returning to Canada, I have expanded my activism to include supporting Indigenous sovereignty. Even though I am Black, I am still a settler. I am a visitor in their movement. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the land back camp in Caledonia called 1492 Land Back Lane. Haudenosaunee land defenders successfully canceled a housing development project on their land by occupying the site for almost a year and are still there. I visited the camp a few times last summer to directly support their struggle. It was on my second visit that I had to confront my visitor status. After the injunction against Land Back Lane was made permanent, a confrontation between land defenders and the police was occurring at the camp. Hearing the news, I quickly zoomed down to join the fight. When I got to the camp, it was quiet and dark. I found two people by the fire and I asked them how I could help. They handed me an axe and asked me to chop wood for the fire. They told me the confrontation was happening down the road, so I asked if I would be more useful there, just hoping that they would say yes. They said no, and that they needed people to watch the camp and tend to the fire. Truthfully, I was a little annoyed. I had come down there to face off with police, not just chop wood. Besides, I'm a city slicker from Toronto and sucked at it. I took a moment and accepted my visitor status and continued chopping wood. As a visitor, I had to trust the Indigenous people's authority. It was not until after that I realized that I actually was more useful chopping wood than being some outsider on the front line. Being a visitor also requires consistent self-reflection and humility. As I was standing there chopping the wood, I had to come to terms with my motives to commandeer their movement. I did want to support the land defenders at the confrontation, but I also had selfish motives. I wanted to feel like I was doing something. I wanted to confirm my activism through another confrontation with police. By paying critical attention, I could recognize and reject my problematic inclinations so that I could reduce my harm and truly support them. By approaching the fight for racial justice as a spiritual practice grounded in our beliefs and principles, UUs can be a progressive force for change. Black Lives Matter is not a trend. BLM is the continuation of a centuries-long struggle. It is only a trend when organizations adorn the slogan and promise vague diversity initiatives without doing any real work. We must ask ourselves, how do we be real anti-racist workers who are not dependent on trends, but a genuine, sustained commitment to support Black lives? Here are my recommendations for practices that can be done individually and as a congregation. First, as UUs, is to adopt the proposed 8th principle that commits to working to dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. The 8th principle has been the topic of fervor discussion in these last months. As many of you know, delegates at the CUC AGM voted in favor of the 8th principle, but the vote was eventually nullified due to procedural issues. In November, a special meeting will be held to vote on the 8th principle and commit to other anti-racist actions. I am also glad to know that Neighborhood will be voting to adopt the 8th principle in the coming weeks. This is an important moment in our faith here in Canada. In the 1970s, UU leaders walked away from the Black struggle because they were uncomfortable with Black power. Failing to adopt the 8th principle in November will be repeating that harmful decision. A decision that will make our congregations less attractive to young and racialized Canadians. A decision that will be out of step with the real anti-racist work that is happening right now. A decision that prioritizes white supremacy over Black lives. Although it was formed in the US, consider what recent protests throughout Canada have shown us. Racism and white supremacy transcends borders. The results from the Dismantling Racism Study Group's report, organized by the CUC, supports this. It is clear that the inherent worth and dignity of every person is not specific enough to combat racism in our congregations and our society. More is needed to include and empower racialized people, and particularly Black people. The time is now for congregations to adopt the 8th principle. We cannot let bureaucracy and discussion pacify us while Black and Indigenous people are fighting for liberation on the streets, while the bodies of Indigenous children are being found in mass graves. The 8th principle is just words, but they are words that ensure we don't forget about our obligation to fight these injustices. The time is now. No, the time was actually yesterday for us to adopt the 8th principle. A second practice is to donate. Reverend Rebecca Parker wrote in an article, Spiritual Practice for Our Time, a recommended practice to counter oppressive systems is to donate to just causes. The work of racial justice gives activists energy, but it often does not feed us or put a roof over our heads. Being arrested has given me an understanding of the resources that this work requires. My guidelines for donating are: try to donate as local and as grassroots as you can. The two Toronto-based groups that I would suggest donating to are Encampment Support Network and Not Another Black Life. These groups directly support our most vulnerable people and the activists defending them. The folks who were arrested and attacked at the clearing of the Lamport encampment are in need of support to pay legal fees and medical fees. I will share how to support these groups after my talk in the chat. One note about these groups is that they don't have nonprofit status or flashy donation pages, but I assure you that the money goes to good places. Third, educate yourselves and listen. Read Black authors. Read them not to wallow in the tragedy of being Black in North America, but to understand how racist systems work and what is being done to oppose them. I suggest the book Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard. Not a book person? Read the resources and articles on the UUA website written by Black Unitarians. Doing the work on the back end means that when it comes time for work on the front end, you are ready. Right now, racialized communities and activists are calling for the defunding of the police. These once radical ideas have been central in the fight for racial justice. I am also aware that many people are turned off by the idea. Truthfully, before the summer of 2020, I also questioned the efficacy of defund the police. What changed my mind was learning that the movement was about moving away from a harmful concept of public safety that relies on racialized policing and punishment to investing in community through programs and services. It is a complex issue, and I understand where the misgivings over defund come from. However, I urge folks to really do their homework on defund the police and the history of policing in Canada. Body cams, sensitivity trainings, and diverse hiring will not fix a system intentionally built to police racialized and poor people and protect the status quo. Showing Up for Racial Justice, an organization I've worked with in Toronto, is offering a congregational action toolkit to help educate and mobilize faith groups on the issue of police. My final practice is to show out and speak up. Education is good, but the education becomes more meaningful when it is followed by action. If you are able, show physical support. If you are not able to physically show up, there are other ways. Write and call officials. Amplify the experiences of Black people and activists on your social media and to your networks. Reflect on how racism exists in your sphere and openly oppose it. As a congregation, you are in a powerful position to write letters of solidarity for activist groups. Seek out groups whose work you support, and as a congregation, send them a letter of solidarity. I know that the Encampment Support Network is currently looking for more people to sign on to their letter, urging John Tory and the city to stop penalizing and punishing homelessness. I was thankful for the support I got from several UU mentors and friends over from last summer all the way to this year. I am learning that spiritual practice helps a person extend beyond themselves. That could mean pushing against the status quo. It could mean accepting the untraditional organizations that are leading the movement. It could also mean adopting new radical tactics to dismantle racism. Whatever it is, it should be uncomfortable, but it should also be liberating. Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt proclaimed, "Church is the place where we stand with one another, look the world in the eye, attempt to see clearly, and gather strength to face what we see with courage and, yes, with joy." End quote. Let us develop an anti-racism spiritual practice with courage and joy. I am encouraged by UUs that are acknowledging their racism, are present in the fight for racial justice, and are letting Black UUs like myself lead the way. Be intentional in dismantling anti-Black racism and pay attention to the movement. Feel the spirit of social justice and let it propel you into action. The spirit of social justice did not end in the summer of 2020. The spirit will not be sidetracked by incremental reform or idle governments. The spirit will not be silenced by police and their machines of destruction. The spirit is in the struggle. The spirit is in the movement. The spirit is in Black rage. The spirit is live. May it live in us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Donovan. Intention and attention. We will remember your message. Will be talked about and thought about. Another worthy cause that needs nurture and sustenance is this congregation. If you contribute by pre-authorized withdrawals, thank you. One of the ways to affirm our lives in this congregation is to contribute to it. If you used to donate in the baskets, please consider writing a check or making an e-transfer, which is the most cost-effective way to give. Consider doing a recurring donation. It's really easy. I know that because I did it, and it means I never have to think about it anymore. I just get regular messages from Hala that my money has been donated. There's a link in your chat window for you now, and all you need to do is click on it and it'll take you to our donation page. And we'll now pause and Susanne will play. Thank you. Now Susanne will lead us in our final song, A Hymn to Freedom.
Thank you. Everyone, please join me in Canadian musician Oscar Peterson in singing his anthem, Hymn to Freedom. When every heart joins every heart and together yearns for liberty, that's when we'll be free. When every hand joins every takes all of us together.
It does indeed. Now I invite you to sing with our choir as we extinguish our chalice.
Although our chalice has been darkened, we hold the fire within our own hearts.
Today, I will leave you with this blessing. May we all find love in our hearts for ourselves and our failings, and for others and theirs. May we grow in wisdom, in generosity, and in compassion. For those of you who do not wish to join a breakout room, thank you for joining us today. Everyone who remains here will be asked to join a breakout room. Today's question to consider is, what are your challenges to making anti-racism a spiritual practice? Special bonus today. One of the breakout rooms will have Donavan in it for question and answer. If you are new and would like to talk about neighborhood, who we are, what we do, just stay in the meeting by saying later to the request to join a breakout room. A staff member will be there to talk and respond to questions you may have. We had a tradition here of circling around and folding each other's hands. Instead, go to gallery view, unmute yourself, and together let us say namaste. I salute the spirit within you. People of neighborhood, friends, namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Donovan. Thank you, Khadija. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Natalie. Be well.
Thank you, Donovan.